I'm 61 years old, and if there is one thing I've learned in 6 decades on this earth, it's that money doesn't change people. It just takes off the mask. I always thought my family was solid. We weren't rich, but we were the kind of people who showed up. If someone's roof leaked, you were over there with a tarp and a ladder. If someone was sick, a casserole was on the porch by sundown. That's how my grandmother Helen raised us. My brother David is 4 years younger than me. He's 57. For as long as I can remember, our roles in the family were set in stone. I was the hands, and David was the head. I became a general contractor. I've spent my life with dirt under my fingernails, framing houses, pouring concrete, and managing crews. It's an honest living, and it paid for my modest house and put my 2 kids through state college. David, on the other hand, went into finance. He wore suits that cost more than my first truck. He became a wealth manager, married a woman named Claire who came from old money, and bought a massive house in a gated community out in the affluent suburbs. My mother always bragged about David. He was the golden boy. But I never resented him for it. I was proud of him. I thought he was the smart one. I thought he had it all figured out. I didn't know his entire life was a house of cards, and I certainly didn't know he was willing to burn down our grandmother's legacy to save himself. Grandma Helen passed away 8 months ago at the age of 94. She was a tough, sharp woman right to the end. She lived in a beautiful mid-century brick ranch in a highly desirable neighborhood in Elmwood Park. She and my grandfather bought it in 1958. The place was a time capsule, but it was rock solid. Hardwood floors under the carpets, a good foundation, and a yard that she kept like a botanical garden. The house was completely paid off. No mortgage, no liens, just free and clear equity. When Grandma's will was read, there were no surprises. She left everything to be split evenly between David and me 50-50. Her assets consisted of the house, which was appraised at roughly $480,000, and a brokerage account that had about $450,000 in stocks and bonds. Because we were co-executors, David and I sat down at a diner a few days after the funeral to figure out how to handle things. It was an emotional time. I was still grieving, and to be honest, I was exhausted from helping coordinate the funeral arrangements. David ordered a coffee, leaned across the table, and made a proposal that made total sense at the time. He said, "Arthur, you're the builder. You know houses. I'm the finance guy. Why don't we do this cleanly? You take the house, you can renovate it, flip it, or rent it out for your retirement. I'll take the liquid assets, the stocks and bonds. It's almost a perfectly even split, and it saves us the headache of trying to co-manage a property or cash out investments and trigger a bunch of capital gains taxes. I'll handle all the probate paperwork with the estate attorney. You don't have to lift a finger." I agreed immediately. It was a fair deal. I loved that house. I had spent countless summers there. I knew every creak in the floorboards. My plan was to spend the next year taking my time on the weekends, updating the kitchen, modernizing the bathrooms, and pulling up that old carpet to refinish the hardwood. Then I was going to rent it out. The rental income would be a nice cushion for my retirement, which is only a few years away. For the first 6 months, I was perfectly content letting David handle the legal side of things. Probate takes time. Anyone who has dealt with an estate knows that the courts move at a snail's pace. Every time I called David to ask about the progress, he had a perfectly reasonable, bureaucratic excuse. "The judge is backed up on the docket, Artie," he'd say. Or, "We're just waiting on the final clearance from the state tax board to release the deed." I had no reason to doubt him. He was a professional wealth manager. This was his world. In the meantime, I started doing minor things around the property. I kept the lawn mowed. I trimmed the hedges. I went over there on weekends to clear out Grandma's old furniture, donating most of it and putting the sentimental items in storage. I even bought about $5,000 worth of materials, new cabinets, tile, and fixtures, and stored them in the detached garage, ready for when the deed officially transferred to my name and I could pull the permits to start the real work. Things started feeling off around month 7. I tried calling David on a Tuesday to ask if I should go ahead and pay the upcoming property tax bill, or if the estate account was handling it. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. 2 days went by. Nothing. I texted him. He replied with a short message. "Tied up in meetings all week. Estate account will handle taxes. Don't worry about it." It was cold, but David was a busy guy. I let it go. Then came a Saturday in early October. The weather was starting to turn, and I knew I needed to go over to Grandma's house to winterize the sprinkler system and clear the gutters before the autumn leaves really started coming down. I loaded up my truck with my ladders, my tools, and my air compressor, and made the 40-minute drive across town to Elmwood Park. As I turned onto Grandma Street, I was mentally running through my checklist, but when her house came into view, my foot hit the brake on pure instinct. Parked in the driveway, right in front of the detached garage where I was storing my materials, was a massive yellow Penske moving truck. My first thought was that we had squatters. The neighborhood is nice, but vacant houses are targets everywhere. I felt my blood pressure spike. I pulled my truck aggressively up to the curb, threw it in park, and grabbed a heavy steel maglite flashlight from my passenger seat, just in case. I marched up the driveway. The ramp of the moving truck was down. A guy in his early 30s, wearing a backwards baseball cap and a college sweatshirt, was carrying a flat-screen TV out of the back of the truck. A woman about the same age was carrying a box of kitchen supplies up the front walkway. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice booming across the lawn. "What the hell are you doing? Put that down right now." The young guy froze, looking at me like I was a crazy person. "Excuse me? You're trespassing," I barked, walking fast toward the front porch. "This is private property, my grandmother's property. I'm the executor. You need to pack your truck and get out of here before I call the cops." The young woman set her box down on the porch. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. "I don't know who you are, mister, but you need to back off. We aren't trespassing. We bought this house." I stopped dead in my tracks. The anger in my chest was instantly replaced by a cold, dropping sensation in my stomach. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice suddenly much quieter. "We bought the house," the young guy said, walking over and standing protectively next to his wife. "We closed on Tuesday. We got the keys on Thursday. I have the paperwork sitting right inside on the kitchen counter if you really need to see it, but honestly, you need to leave." "That's impossible," I stammered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my heavy brass key, the key Grandma had given me 20 years ago. I walked past them, ignoring their protests, and shoved my key into the front door deadbolt. It didn't turn. It didn't even fit all the way in. The lock was brand new. "Hey!" the guy shouted, stepping toward me. "I am calling the police right now." "Call them," I said, leaning against the brick wall, suddenly feeling like I couldn't catch my breath. "Please, call them, because this house is in an estate. It can be sold. I'm a co-executor. I never signed a single piece of paper to sell this house." The woman looked at me, her annoyance shifting into genuine concern. She could see the panic on my face. She told her husband to wait. She went inside and came back out 2 minutes later holding a thick manila folder. She pulled out a stack of papers and handed me the top sheet. It was a HUD-1 settlement statement, a closing document. I stared at the paper. The address was correct. The buyers were listed as Jason and Emily Miller. The seller was listed as the estate of Helen, and underneath that, it listed the representatives. David's name was there, and right next to it was my name, and at the bottom of the page, where the sellers had to sign to release the property, was David's signature, and right next to it was a signature that looked exactly like mine. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the purchase price, $420,000. The house was worth at least $480,000. It had been sold at a severe discount for a quick, all-cash close. Who was the real estate agent?" I asked, my hands shaking so badly the paper was rattling. "It was an off-market private sale," Jason Miller said, his tone softening. "We bought it directly through a guy named David. He said he was managing his grandmother's estate and wanted to avoid agent commissions. He gave us a great deal because we had a cash offer ready." I handed the paper back to the woman. "I am so sorry for coming at you like that," I said, my voice hollow. "Enjoy your new home." I walked back to my truck in a daze. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. My brother had sold the house. He forged my signature. He sold our grandmother's legacy from right under my feet to strangers for a quick cash payout. And my $5,000 worth of construction materials in the garage? The Millers said David told them to keep whatever was in there as a bonus. I didn't call David. I didn't text him. Calling him would give him a chance to spin a lie. I needed facts. I needed evidence. Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I was standing inside the county clerk's office. I requested the public records for the property transfer. The clerk handed me a copy of the quitclaim deed that had been filed to transfer the title from the estate to the Millers. I stared at the document. There was my signature. It was a damn good forgery, but it wasn't mine. The loop on the A in Arthur was slightly too tight. But what caught my eye wasn't the signature. It was the notary stamp. In order to sell a house, the signatures have to be notarized. The stamp on the document belonged to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. I knew that name. Sarah Jenkins was David's executive assistant at his wealth management firm. David hadn't just forged my name. He had coerced or paid his assistant to commit a felony by notarizing a signature for a person who wasn't in the room. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, premeditated crime. From the clerk's office, I drove straight to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I asked a buddy of mine who develops commercial real estate to recommend the most ruthless, stone-cold litigator he knew. He sent me to a guy named Robert Vance. I sat in Robert's office, laid out the documents, and told him the story. Robert didn't show an ounce of emotion. He just took notes. When I was done, he looked at me over his glasses. "Your brother is looking at federal wire fraud, state-level forgery, and grand larceny," Robert said flatly. "The question is, Arthur, how far do you want to take this? He's your blood. If I unleash the dogs, he's going to lose his license, his job, his money, and potentially his freedom. Some families back down when they realize the consequences." "Unleash the dogs," I said without hesitation. He stopped being my brother the second he forged my name. Robert got to work. He filed an emergency injunction and subpoenaed the estate bank accounts, as well as David's personal accounts. It took about a week to get the financial records. When Robert called me back into his office to review them, the truth finally came out. David was broke, not just broke, but drowning in a level of debt I couldn't even comprehend. Despite his expensive suits and the country club membership, David had been living completely on credit for 5 years. He had made a series of disastrous margin trades in his personal portfolio that wiped out his savings. He was 3 months behind on his massive mortgage, but the nail in the coffin was the IRS. David had failed to pay his quarterly estimated taxes for 3 years running. The IRS was threatening to place a lien on his house and garnish his wages. When Grandma died, David saw a lifeline. He didn't just take the $450,000 in liquid stocks like we agreed. He drained that account entirely to pay off the IRS and keep his house out of foreclosure. But it wasn't enough to cover all his debts, so he panicked. He orchestrated the quick cash sale of the house for $420,000, forged my signature, had his assistant rubber stamp it, and diverted the funds into a shadow account he controlled. By the time Robert got the records, the money from the house sale was almost entirely gone, swallowed up by credit card companies, personal loans, and back taxes. The betrayal was so absolute, it made me physically sick. He didn't just steal from me. He stole the house I was going to use to fund my retirement, just to maintain the illusion that he was a wealthy, successful man. I waited until Thanksgiving. I know that sounds vindictive, but I didn't care. Our elderly mother was hosting it at her assisted living condo, and David and his wife Claire were going to be there. I wanted him to be comfortable. I wanted him to think he got away with it. I arrived right as David was carving the turkey. He was smiling, holding court, wearing a cashmere sweater, looking like the picture of success.
"Artie,"
he said, waving the carving knife. "Grab a plate. Dark meat or white?" I didn't take off my coat. I walked right up to the dining room table. Our mother was sitting at the head. Claire was pouring wine. I reached into my inside jacket pocket, pulled out a thick envelope containing the lawsuit, the forged deed, and the bank records, and I dropped it right in the middle of the mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. The room went dead silent. "What is this?" David asked, his smile faltering, looking at the envelope. "That," I said, making sure my voice carried so everyone could hear, "is a lawsuit. And a copy of the felony forgery you committed. You sold Grandma's house, David." My mother gasped. Claire put the wine bottle down so hard it clinked loudly against the glass table. "Arthur, what are you talking about?" Claire asked, looking bewildered. "The house is in probate." "No, Claire, it isn't," I said, staring dead into David's eyes. I watched the color drain out of his face. I watched the confident, successful wealth manager evaporate, leaving behind a terrified, pathetic little boy. He sold it a month ago to a couple named the Millers for a cash discount. He forged my signature on the quitclaim deed, had his secretary Sarah notarize it, and stole $420,000 from me to pay off his IRS debts. "Artie, let's go in the hallway," David said, his voice trembling. He reached out to grab my arm. "Let's talk about this in private, please." I ripped my arm away. "We aren't talking in private. We're talking right here. You looked me in the eye at a diner and told me I could have the house. You knew I was going to use it for my retirement, and you stole it. It was a bridge loan," David suddenly shouted, the desperation cracking his voice. "I was going to put the money back, Artie. I swear to God, I just needed liquidity for a few months. I have a huge bonus coming in February. I was going to pay you back with interest. You have to believe me. You don't take a bridge loan by forging someone's signature on a legal document, David. That's called grand larceny." Our mother started crying. It broke my heart to do it in front of her, but she needed to know who her golden boy really was. "I'm giving you a choice, David," I said, my voice cold and steady. "My lawyer has already drafted the criminal complaint. I haven't filed it with the district attorney yet, but I will on Monday morning unless you make me whole. I want my $420,000, plus the $5,000 of materials you gave away, plus my legal fees by Friday." "I don't have it," David whispered, looking down at his shoes. Claire was staring at him in absolute horror. She didn't know about the debt. She didn't know they were broke. The illusion was shattered. "Then I guess you better sell your house, little brother," I said, "or get used to wearing an orange jumpsuit." I turned around and walked out. I didn't eat Thanksgiving dinner that year. I went to a diner and had a piece of pie by myself. But for the first time in a month, I felt like I could breathe. The fallout was catastrophic for David. When Claire found out the extent of his financial lies, the secret debt, the IRS liens, the stolen inheritance, she packed her bags and left him within 48 hours. She filed for divorce the following week. David tried to scrape the money together. He tried to get a loan, but his credit was destroyed. He begged our mother for help, but she lived on a fixed income and had nothing to give him. By Wednesday of the following week, David's lawyer called Robert. They wanted to settle, to keep me from going to the police and ruining his career permanently. David agreed to hand over his entire retirement account to me, liquidating his 401k and taking the massive tax penalties himself. It barely covered what he owed me. He was also forced to sell his luxury house just to cover his remaining debts and the divorce settlement with Claire. As for his assistant Sarah, I didn't want to see a young woman go to prison for being pressured by her boss. I let her off the hook regarding the criminal charges, but I did report the incident to the state licensing board. She lost her notary commission and was fired from the firm. David was forced to resign from his wealth management firm when they found out about the ethical violations, dodging getting fired and publicly disgraced by the skin of his teeth. It's been almost a year since this all went down. I got my money, though I didn't get the house. I drove by it a few weeks ago. The Millers painted the brick white and put in a new front door. It looks nice. I don't harbor any ill will toward them. They were just looking for a home, and they didn't know they were dealing with a snake. I used the settlement money to buy a beautiful piece of land up in Wisconsin. I'm building a cabin on it. I'm doing the framing myself, working with my own two hands, just like I always have. I haven't spoken to David since that Thanksgiving. Our mother still calls me, crying, wishing we could reconcile. But I told her my door is permanently closed. You can forgive a lot of things in a family. You can forgive a harsh word or a bad argument. But you cannot forgive a man who looks you in the eye, shakes your hand, and actively plots to steal your future. Money didn't change David. It just showed me exactly who he always was. And I'm perfectly happy never seeing him again.